Alright, let's begin by talking about how our government was reformed. We start out with Washington, his cabinet that he went to whenever he needed advice, and the federal judiciary that the Congress had just created at the time. And here's an extra fact for you. Did you know that John Jay was the first Chief Justice in the federal judiciary? Wacky stuff, am I right, man? But as for that, life seemed pretty tame until a wild reality appeared. And you want to know what that wild reality was? It was revenue. They needed revenue for their debts and expenses. So James Madison and Alexander Hamilton did the logical step. They created two different plans instead of working together, which would ultimately have a somewhat large effect later on. We'll come back to that. But anyway, back to the matter at hand. Madison's plan revolved around taxing imports, which led up to the Tariff Act of 1788, which put taxes on certain imported goods, and the Tonnage Act, a tax per ton cargo on ships entering the United States, with foreign ships being taxed at higher rates. While Hamilton agreed with James's plan, he also thought that the government needed to be able to borrow money. But first, he had to pay back the people who had bought bonds during the Revolutionary War so that the wealthier people would be able to trust the federal government enough to lend money to it. The only problem was they ended up selling their bonds to speculators, basically investors, for way lower pricing because they believed they would never be paid back. So they, along with J.M., felt that it was unfair. In the end, the dispute was settled with a promise to move the capital to the south of the Potomac Rivers, called the District of Columbia. Quite the compromise, I must say. Then, Hamilton really wanted a national bank, so he went up to Congress to ask them, but once again, Mr. J.M. came round and started about how the federal government's enumerated powers hadn't said they could, only to get shut down by Hamilton thanks to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, basically creating an implied law. Then blam! Just like the Powerpuff Girls in 1998, the Bank of the United States in 1791 was born, and with a 20-year charter, might I add. So all was pretty well. Wait, what's that? Huh? A bottle of whiskey? Nani? Never mind. It's just some enraged Western farmers who don't like the tax on manufacturing whiskey since they distill their grain into it, thus making them create a rebellion in 1794. No big deal. Wait, but They're terrorizing collectors, stopping court proceedings, and robbing mail? Better send the washing machine and about 13,000 troops to crush the rebellion. Neat. Back to the important stuff, though. Remember that whole two different plans thing I was talking about? Well, it's back into relevance because thanks to it, two factions were created, the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists. The Democratic Republicans later being known as the Democrats, and the Federalists just kind of disappearing today. Republicans taking their place, but the Republicans are nothing like the Federalists. Back to the Federalists. Hamilton favored the strong national government, believing that democracy was dangerous to liberty, so he usually put the government in the hands of the rich, well-born, and able. Meanwhile, back at the Democratic Republicans, Jefferson believed that the nation's strength came from its independent farmers, so most of his ideas were basically Anglicanism. He believed putting too much emphasis on commerce would have the rich owning everything, also that the wealthy would corrupt the government. So yeah, Democratic Republicans supported agriculture over commerce and usually went against federal government power. Southwest supported Republicans, Northeast supported Federalists. Life seems pretty... What the heck?